Tapes rolling. Action.
Hi, I'm Tim Flaherty, Chief of the Wexford Volunteer Fire Company, and what we're going to do here is this quick training presentation on the Scott Revolve SCBA filling station. In the time we have here, we're going to cover the components of the system and some safety precautions in filling cylinders, and then actually demonstrate how to fill an SCBA cylinder. So right now we're in a gear cleaning room off of the apparatus bay, and in this room we have the actual filling station, and then over against the wall the SCBA staging area. So when you bring your cylinders that need to be filled, they go over there, the log book's over there, and all those related items there. So the SCBA filling station in this room, what it involves is the control panel, which is basically the interface to the air compressor, which is over in the adjacent room in the maintenance shop. You have the emergency stop button. You have your pressure gauges for the compressor and the storage pressure. You have your regulator control valve, the fill control valve, and then the gauge that tells you what the actual pressure is for the breathing air, what you want to get your target to, and then when you're filling, what that pressure is going to. Down here you have the carousel. It's two-sided, so you can charge two cylinders and have two cylinders set up in standby. It includes the couplings. These are just caps that screw in to protect the couplings, the bleeder valve, and then down here is the lock for the door. So once it's closed, any kind of operation, it's not going to let you until you do the interlock. So those are the major components of the fill station. What we're going to do next is take you over to the maintenance shop and discuss briefly the air compressor and cascade system over there. Okay, we're back over here in the maintenance shop. Here we have the breathing air compressor and the storage air cylinders, the cascade system. There's really not a lot of interaction with these components when you're doing a basic filling operation, but it's important to know they're here for two reasons. One, if you have a problem during your fill operation, you hear a leak or a strange noise, more than likely you're going to have to come over to this room to assess what the situation is. And the other critical factor is the disconnect switch up on the wall. The disconnect switch is the recommendation of our manufacturer and installing company was that we keep it in the off position when not in use, just to protect the system from a surge, since it's not a system that we're using every day, multiple times a day. So our policy is to keep that off. So anytime you're involved with the filling operation, you're going to want to come to this room first and hit the disconnect switch or turn the disconnect switch on. It's actually, we've already turned it into the on position, so we're going to be ready to go when we're ready to do the demonstration of filling the cylinders. So we're going to do that, or actually we're going to talk about the safety precautions involved with cylinders next. Okay, we're back in the fill station room, and what I'll do is cover some of the safety precautions involved with filling SCBA cylinders. Some of the basic things that are main thing to be aware of is we're dealing with compressed air, and compressed air can be dangerous if we're not careful with it. So always a good idea to wear safety glasses. Just protect your eyes. You know, if you have a line blow or a sudden release of pressure, you don't get blasted in the eye with dirt. Always a good idea to have the safety glasses on. We do have hearing protection. There are hearing plugs in this room. You don't necessarily need to use them, wear them inside this room. The decibel level is relatively low. But with that compressor over in the maintenance shop, if you have for some reason have to go over into the maintenance shop, it's going to be pretty loud over there. You probably don't want to throw the hearing protection in when you go over there and have to go over there for an extended period of time. Other critical things to keep in mind anytime you're doing anything with filling cylinders is to be aware of the hydrostatic test date of the cylinders that you're filling. They need to be within 5 years of the last test date. If they're outside of that 5-year range, the cylinder is not to be filled. You have to remove it from service until such time that it can have the hydrostatic test done. So that's a very important factor to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is to never adjust the fittings. So down here are the fittings. Never adjust these fittings when they're under pressure. Always bleed off the pressure before you do any kind of adjustment of fittings. Another thing is keep in mind if you have multiple cylinders that have different pressures. We use 4,500 PSI cylinders, but say we're training and a company's here that uses a lower pressure 2,250 PSI cylinder. We can't mix those two types of cylinders in the same fill operation. So for whatever reason we have that situation, you want to separate those two pressure ratings in your filling operations. Another thing to keep in mind is if you have cylinders, maybe we're out on a freezing day, cylinders were exposed to freezing temperatures for a very long time and they're coming in very close to freezing. Either one, probably ultimately what you want to do is just throw them in the staging area and let them get back up to room temperature before you fill them. But if it's a situation where you need to get them filled back up, be aware that as that cylinder comes back up to room temperature, that gas or the air in there is going to expand and you could potentially end up with an overpressured cylinder. So what you want to do in that case is just watch it as it comes back up to room temperature. And as you see that pressure increase over the rating of the cylinder, bleed off the air so it's not overpressured or pressurized. Always open up all valves that you're going to be working on the cylinder, on the machine, just very slowly. Close them slowly. Don't be in a rush to open the valves. Again, because you're dealing with pressure, you don't want to have some sort of catastrophic failure. Do not overfill the cylinders. If it's a rating for 4,500 psi, don't try to crank it up to 5,000 psi and think, well, once it cools off, it'll be back down to 4,500 psi. We don't want to expose that cylinder to that overpressure. Remember, when you're tightening any kind of connections, it's just finger tight. Like here, the bleeder valves. These are just the caps, but the caps is just finger tight. You don't want to over tighten any of these devices. You don't need a tool or anything like that to do tightening or loosening of any type of connection. Remember the pinch points. Remember this is a carousel, so the pinch points between the carousel and the frames. Keep your hands free and clear. Any clothing or equipment you might have on, try to stay away so you don't get jammed up in there and injured or damage to equipment or the machine because you got too close to the carousel. And then finally, if you hear any leaks, you're in the middle of a filling operation and you hear air letting loose somewhere, you want to stop that operation and try to figure out what that leak is before you continue on with the filling operation. And that's pretty much the safety issues in a nutshell. And next we're going to show you the actual filling of the cylinder. Okay, now we're ready to go through demonstrating the actual fill of a cylinder. So over in that other room, I've hit that disconnect to turn the system on. And what I do is I come to the control panel. I'm going to hit the F2 button. And then it's going to give me information on when the air sample is due, the carbon monoxide calibration date, and the hours remaining on the air purifier. If you would ever see the warning come up that say like the carbon monoxide calibration is due, I would notify a line officer so we can make sure that we get that done. So that's just information that you need to be aware of. So it's all good. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to hit the operate button. And then it's going to come up and it's going to say select compressor control mode. And you always want to select auto. And I'm going to hit auto, and then I'm going to hit start. And what auto does for normal filling operations, why you always want to do that, is that air compressor is always going to fill up those storage cylinders automatically. So you always want to run it in the auto mode for normal SCBA filling operation. So that's all good to go. The storage cylinders are full, so you don't hear that compressor kicking on. Next thing I'm going to do, all these couplings and the bleeder valves, I want to make sure are finger tight. Okay, they all are, so I'm going to lock this valve. Some residual air in the system. So I'm going to open the fill control valve just a half a turn, and I'm going to increase the regulator pressure. And what I want to do is get that breathing air cylinder pressure to what our rating of our cylinders are, which ours are 4,500 psi. I heard the compressor kick it on the other side there. So I'm going to close the fill control valve. bleed out here a little bit, as I'm going to go over, I'm going to get our cylinder that we're going to fill. So I'm going to come over to the SCBA staging area. I'm going to grab a cylinder, bring it up to the inspection cradle. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to look the cylinder over to make sure there's no serious gouges or nicks, any obvious damage to the cylinder that would need to be repaired before we fill it up. And as I mentioned earlier, I want to check the hydrostatic test tape. This one is April 2013, so we're good. It's not going to need hydroed again until April 2018. So we have a good cylinder that we can fill. And I'm going to look on here. We have a ID number that we assigned to the cylinders. This one's number 58, so I'm going to take that number. And I'm going to go over to the log, and I'm going to write on today's fill date. This is October 9th. Hydro date 4/13. Cylinder make is MSA. Cylinder number is 58. And it's cylinder owner is Wexford Fire Company, and then I'm just going to throw my initials on there. So now the log's filled out, and that log also helps to serve the purpose of making sure that you're looking at that hydro date. Very important that we don't fill those cylinders that are out of hydro date. So now I'm going to take the cylinder over. Take the cap off the coupling port and connect my cylinder. Again, just finger tight. Okay, I'm going to close the bleeder valve. Now if I wanted to do another cylinder, I can connect that other cylinder up. Once both cylinder valves are connected up, you can open them. So if I did a second cylinder, now I can open that cylinder. Okay, but I don't have it. So I'm going to switch the carousel, lock it back up, and what happens is you're going to see the breathing air cylinder pressure gauge is going to drop down to match what that cylinder's reading, what the cylinder's reading on the SCBA, the breathe the cylinder. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to slowly open the fill control valve to let air go into that cylinder. You want to do this slowly because you don't want to damage the cylinder or overheat the cylinder. Like we talked earlier, all valves open slowly. And always a good idea, if you have a cylinder that is empty or near empty, open them or let that air go in there as slowly as possible, because if you try to cram that air in there, what's going to happen is it's going to fill up, but 20-30 minutes later, you're going to go from 4,500 psi down to like 3,000 psi, and if you throw it back on the truck, they're obviously not going to be full cylinders. So try to get in there as slow as possible. You're always going to, when they're that low, you're always going to lose some pressure due to the heating of the cylinder. They're always going to heat up somewhat. So if you have the time, fill them up, let them cool for a little bit, and then come back and top them off. Okay, so this cylinder is full, so I'm going to close the control valve, and unlock the door, and I'm going to close the cylinder valve. Now once I do that, I've had the other one, I've closed that one, so I'm going to open the bleeder. Okay, now I can disconnect that cylinder. I'm going to bring it back over here to our staging area, and then if I was filling multiple cylinders, I'd just sit that one aside and then bring the next cylinders up for inspection. So that's done. So I'm going to come back over here. Let's say that we're done with our filling operation. The way I want to shut this down is I'm going to back off the regulator. Bleed off the pressure, use it to open the filter valve. Put that cap back on. Okay, we let that bleed out, and then what you're going to do is right now we hear the air compressor running over on the other side. Right now, it's going down through the cool down process, so just let that compressor run until it shuts down automatically. And then when you're all done with everything you need to do, just make sure you go back over into the maintenance shop, hit that disconnect off, and then you're good to go. You can leave for today. So that's the basic operation of filling the cylinders, filling SCBA cylinders using the Revolve Air Charge Station. Thank you.